Na, wie geht's?
Präsident, danke.
Ja, schön, dass Sie gekommen sind.
Danke, dass Sie
Ja, wir haben uns schon so lange vermisst.
Wollte ich auch sagen, das ist schon lange her.
Ja.
Aber ich will ja nicht Ihre kostbare Zeit in
Nein,
Anspruch
es ist
nehmen.
immer eine Freude, wenn ich Sie treffe.
Aber ab und zu ist es sehr
Das
nett.
ist sehr wichtig. Hallo,
Hallo.
Hayo, nice to have you. Ja. Ja, wann sind Sie angekommen?
Aber 4 Tage.
4 Tage. Jetzt kommen Sie jetzt bei mir. Ja, läuft alles nach Ihrem Sinne?
Es läuft alles, wir sind fertig.
Sehr schön.
Also wir haben wieder ein Programm, die Finanzierung vom Ausland, sodass für die nächste Zeit bis zu den Wahlen, das von der wirtschaftlichen Seite.
Ach ja, das ist sehr schön. Der Herr Genanja Bijoy war bei mir und wir haben
Wait a little bit. To start,
So what did you discuss?
topic did you discuss?
Well, as you know, we just finished discussions on the next letter of intent, and therefore I had to explain the President the main elements of the letter of intent, because he is the one who has to approve it, just as our management in Washington has to approve it before it is published.
What are the main elements?
Let me be short and simple. There are 4. One is a continued firm monetary policy. Monetary policy has to be firm and has to continue to be firm to make sure inflation comes down further. Because inflation hits the people most. Second, an expansionary fiscal policy in order to underpin the recovery. The budget is before the Parliament. There may be little changes here and there, but the expectation is that it will be approved and it will have a substantial deficit, which under the circumstances is necessary to get the recovery going. The third element, and that's a very important element, is to intensify bank restructuring. And with this letter of intent, we will enter a very intensive phase, and we will be able to observe that in the coming weeks and months of dealing with the banking system in 2 ways: the recapitalization of the private banks will go ahead once the budget is approved, and second, the eventual merger of the 3 state banks. That is very important. The recapitalization and the merger of the state banks will cost a lot of money that the Parliament has to approve from the budget, but at the same time the government has to make sure that a large part of this money is coming back by collecting from the debtors who got all these credits and who now at the moment are not repaid. That's the third element. The fourth element, you can guess, it's a corporate debt restructuring, the Jakarta initiative. Now that had been announced a while ago. It was a bit difficult to get it started, but it has started. Actual deals are being concluded, and this is very important because without clean balance sheets of the corporations, they will not qualify to get credit, and so they cannot expand production. So all 4 elements are essential for stability and recovery. And these policies have been fully agreed with the economic team, and they, I'm sure, will get the final approval of the President.
What about the people's economy, Mr. Neiss? You said before the people's economy will be incorporated into this letter of intent.
Yes, it has been incorporated, and you will be able to see it soon. The part that is incorporated in the letter of intent is mostly the support financially and otherwise of small and medium-sized enterprises. And this part of the people's economy had been a concern even before the name people's economy came up, and the more can be done, the better, because these enterprises are suffering most from the present crisis. They need the support. It's important that this support is given in a substantive way, but also in a transparent way and in an objective way.
How inflation target in 1999 from IMF for Indonesia?
The target for inflation is to get inflation down very close to 10%. See, the ideal would be to get it below 2 digits. Whether that is possible, we have to see. But the present target for the year is to come to a rate by the end of the financial fiscal year very close to.
Do you optimistic that will be achieved?
Well, it will be achieved if the policies that are necessary are being implemented, and if the international environment remains favorable.
How the
Then it can be achieved. Also, what will help is that the harvest this year will be good, will be normal. That all will help inflation. Again, a measure of social and political stability is an important ingredient, because without that you have speculation, you have panic buying, you have a depreciation of the exchange rate, and you could have a restart on acceleration of inflation. So that's something that we hope can be avoided. So nobody can give you a precise forecast. It depends on many elements. You can only set targets and then set policies that are good enough to achieve those targets.
How many deficit of the budget that we allow by IMF? But the deficit of the budget is said that the budget will be expected. How many percent that can be allowed by the IMF?
How many percent can be what?
Yeah, can be allowed by the IMF.
It's not the IMF allowing a budget deficit. The government has put together a budget in consultation with the IMF and other experts and other institutions, and has put this budget to Parliament for approval. Now that budget has a deficit of around 6% of GDP.
So you mean that there can be revise of a budget in this case?
Well, that can be a change in the budget. Yeah. Also, if the economic situation changes in the course of the year, budgetary targets would have to be revised. Remember, in the current year, we started out with a different budget. It had to be revised, the exchange rate assumptions had to be changed, and so on.
How IMF sees this currently dollar rupiah and weakening of rupiah?
Well, there has been some weakening, which, in my view, are not so much connected with economic developments, but with domestic, social, and political developments, in particular, a deteriorating security situation. However, we shouldn't exaggerate the exchange rate movements. It is relatively stable, there is no great volatility, and it is still at the level that is a lot more appreciated than only last summer.
So you mean that the rupiah will be strengthened in that long? You have to consider the
If stability can be maintained, and if the policies of the economic program are pursued, the rupiah should strengthen. Because it's still more depreciated than would be the normal.
How about the interpretation of that? The interpretation was the problem with the parliament. How MF see this problem?
But the recapitalization is being explained by the Minister of Finance to the Parliament, and I'm sure he will be successful to get their eventual agreement, because the recapitalization is absolutely necessary. There's no way to get around it, because A, the depositors have to be protected. In fact, the government has given a guarantee to depositors. So all deposits, however good or bad the bank is, they have to be repaid if they want to withdraw. So therefore, money for recapitalization is necessary. And second, the Indonesian economy needs a functioning banking system that can have normal lending operations and support the recovery. Now, in order to restore the soundness of the banking system, you have to recapitalize. That's simply a consequence of all the damage that had been done in the past. It has to be corrected. There's no way to avoid it, and I'm sure Parliament will see the same way. But as I said before, there are two sides. One is the government putting in money for recapitalization. The other one is the government getting back money from the collection of the debts. So all the loans that have been given to the various corporations, that they will have to be collected. Now, they may not have, the government may not be able to collect them in full, but at least they should be collected to the maximum, and to the extent that these debts cannot be paid in cash, they will have to be paid in assets, which the government can sell and then get the cash.
But the government have appointed relevant banks for this program. Have you consulted with IMF?
But all steps in banking sector reform are done in close consultation with the IMF, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and international experts, which the government itself has employed or which the institutions supply. So there is a close consultation process. How many banks will be recapitalized hasn't yet been established, because the process of screening the banks and deciding whether they meet the criteria or not hasn't been concluded. But it is in an advanced stage, so we won't have to wait too long to find out the exact number of banks that will get an infusion of government money. But not every bank will get it. Only banks who meet strict objective criteria. That is very important. If you use public money, you cannot use it arbitrarily or discretionary. You cannot punish some or favor others. You have to establish objective criteria. And the public has to watch this process. Therefore, we have agreed all this will be made very transparent. And you will be able to watch it.
How do you see the economic growth in 1999?
We expect that the drop in output will moderate more, and that eventually, maybe around mid-year, but again nobody knows exactly the timing, it will bottom out and then slowly recover. So that on average for the year we may have something like zero growth, or slightly positive or slightly negative, depending how soon the upturn comes about.
So when the new letter of intent will be found?
It will be finalized and published 2 to 3 weeks. That is the normal process, by the way. You remember that in the past, in our monthly letters of intent, it was published right away because we shortcut the process of approval by sending it to management in Washington while we are still here. Now we go back to the normal process, which is the common process, that once the letter of intent is agreed between the teams, we go back to Washington and it goes through headquarter review and approval. Maybe some further technical work, maybe there are some further small changes here and there which we agree with the authorities, and in about 2 to 3 weeks normally that's completed and then it is published. And then the board meeting normally is 2 weeks later, because once the letter of intent is made available to all the governments, they need some time to study, formulate an opinion, and give instructions to their executive directors in the IMF how to vote, whether to vote yes or no, or whether to abstain. As you know, during all the monthly reviews, the instructions always have been yes, and yes unanimously. And I hope this will continue.
How much money will the IMF release?
That I cannot tell you because the phasing, well, two things. First, we have to rephase the amount, the total amount that still can be drawn, because we want bi-monthly reviews. If you look at the published phasing in the last letter of intent, we would switch to quarterly, which would be the completely normal thing. But we thought for a while during the pre-election period, it was still a difficult period, we do it every 2 months. So you have to rearrange the amounts. That's one. The second is the IMF management will propose to the executive board to increase the total amount. So the executive board, when they meet in mid-March, will not only consider the program and the new phasing, but also the addition to the amount.
You mean on top of the 11.3?
On top of what is there.
How much money?
See, the existing amount will be rephased to allow bi-monthly disbursements, and then an additional amount is added to the existing amount, and that will also be rephased.
How much money?
And therefore, I don't want to mention a precise number, but it will be a substantial number, because during this period, Indonesia needs outside official support, because we cannot expect that in the pre-election period there will be a large inflow of private money. Most private investors will wait.
Yep.
Now, some may not, but we cannot count on it. Therefore, we have to provide for an adequate flow of official money, so Bank Indonesia can maintain its comfortable reserve position. And this in turn will add to confidence in the exchange market.
Yeah, now before the
in mid-March. Yeah.
So,
no, I mean.
Okay, one more question. Here we have another question.
No, maybe let him ask, because there should be no understanding.
Yes.
In mid-March, the executive board will approve the program. Will decide to approve the program. It will also decide to approve the rephasing of the existing undisbursed amount, and it will decide on the proposal to add an additional amount to the existing amount, and this additional amount will of course also be rephased, and therefore if the executive board approves the additional amount, part of it will already be disbursed in mid-March together with the existing amount.